At one of the biggest high schools in the district, there was a young girl named Jasmine. She wasn't the most popular, but she wasn't invisible either. She kept to herself for the most part, did her work, and avoided unnecessary drama. But in a school where social circles were everything, it wasn't always easy to stay out of the spotlight. Jasmine's situation was more complicated than most of her peers realized. She had been at this school for a few years, but it had never felt like home. The students were nice enough, but she often felt out of place. The majority of the student body was white, and Jasmine, as one of the few black girls, stood out in a way that made her uncomfortable. She wasn't one to bring attention to herself, but sometimes it felt like she couldn't escape it. And though she had friends, they were few and far between. Mostly people who could see past her skin color and accepted her for who she was. But there were others, those who seemed to find joy in making her feel small. A group of girls had made it their mission to make Jasmine's life as difficult as possible. These girls were part of the popular crowd, and they didn't take kindly to anyone who didn't fit their idea of who belonged in their group. Jasmine had long since stopped counting the number of times they'd made hurtful comments or whispered about her when they thought she wasn't listening. It wasn't just about her appearance, though. They would mock her for how she talked, her hair, and even her taste in music. Anything they could find that was different from what they were used to became a reason to pick on her. Some days it felt like their teasing was never ending, and Jasmine would go home from school exhausted, her self-esteem taking a hit each time. But it wasn't until one particular day that things would take a turn. It all started during lunch. Jasmine had sat down at her usual spot by the windows, where she could look outside and feel a little more at peace. She wasn't alone, but she wasn't part of any group either. She had learned to enjoy her own company, reading books or watching videos on her phone during breaks. She was accustomed to the usual whispers and giggles from the girls who didn't like her, but she had learned to tune them out. They had always stayed at a distance, never crossing a certain line. That afternoon, though, something felt different. Jasmine had just taken a bite of her sandwich when she noticed a few of the girls walking towards her. The same girls who had been giving her trouble for months. Normally, they would ignore her or make a quick, rude comment and leave. But today, they were heading straight for her, and the look in their eyes was different. There was something about their stride, something in their smiles that felt off. "Hey, Jasmine," one of them, a girl with long blonde hair and a smirk on her face, said in a tone that sounded too sweet to be friendly. Jasmine looked up, instinctively feeling a tightness in her chest. "Hey," she replied cautiously. The girl didn't respond right away. Instead, she exchanged a look with the others, and they all stood in front of Jasmine, blocking her from leaving. Jasmine felt a rush of unease, her stomach twisting. The way they were standing so close to her was intimidating, and she could feel her heart race in her chest. She didn't know what they wanted, but she had a sinking feeling it wouldn't be good. "So, you think you're better than us?" the girl with the blonde hair said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Jasmine blinked, surprised by the question. "What? No, Oh, don't play dumb," another girl cut in. This one had curly hair and a permanent scowl on her face. "You think you can just come here and act all perfect and smart like you're above us? We see right through you." Jasmine's mouth went dry, but she refused to back down. "I'm not acting like anything," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. The girls weren't listening, though. They were too busy smirking, as if they were enjoying the power they had over her. One of them, a tall girl with sharp features, leaned down so she was eye to eye with Jasmine. "We don't like you," she said coldly. "We never have." Jasmine's heart was pounding now. She wanted to stand up and leave, but something told her it wouldn't end if she did. This wasn't just about a few cruel words. They were trying to intimidate her, and they were doing a good job of it. The group stayed there for what felt like hours, throwing insults her way, taunting her for things she couldn't control, things like her skin color, the way her hair curled, the way she spoke. The words stung, but she kept her head down, trying not to let them see the effect it had on her. Finally, one of them spoke up. "Meet us after school," she said. "We'll see if you can handle it when we're not in front of the teachers." Jasmine's blood ran cold. She didn't know what they had in mind, but it didn't sound good. She wanted to say no, to refuse, but the fear that gripped her made it hard to speak. What if they really did something to her? What if no one was there to stop them? In the end, Jasmine didn't have much of a choice. The group left her alone to finish her lunch, but the threat lingered in the air, heavy and unsettling. Jasmine felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She didn't want to deal with this. She didn't want to be in the middle of their cruel games, but she couldn't avoid it anymore. As the final bell of the day rang, signaling the end of the school day, Jasmine slowly packed her things, her hands shaking. She had no idea what she was walking into, but one thing was certain. This wouldn't be over until she faced whatever was waiting for her. When she made her way to the bathroom after school, she hoped for a moment that the girls had forgotten about their little threat. But as she walked through the hallway, she saw them standing by the door waiting. Their faces lit up when they saw her, and Jasmine knew immediately that there was no turning back now. Her heart hammered in her chest as the girls pushed her into the bathroom, one of them blocking the exit. Jasmine tried to stand tall, but fear was creeping up her spine. They were in control now, and she was alone. It felt like the walls of the bathroom were closing in on her, and for a moment she considered running. But the door was blocked, and the girls seemed determined to make her feel small. "Now, let's see if you'll still act so tough when we're done with you," one of them sneered, stepping closer. Jasmine swallowed hard, trying to hold on to the little bit of strength she had left. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was certain. This was far from over. As Jasmine stood in the bathroom, the heavy feeling in her chest grew worse with each passing second. The door was closed, and the girls were now circling her like predators, their smiles wide and mocking. The noise in the room seemed to grow louder, her heart thundering in her ears. Every step they took felt like it echoed through her mind. She had been through tough situations before, but this felt different. She wasn't sure what they were planning, but the way they looked at her made it clear that they wanted more than just to make fun of her. One of the girls stepped forward, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" She sneered, her eyes scanning Jasmine's face. "You act like you belong here, like we should all just accept you." Jasmine felt a wave of frustration rise up within her. It wasn't that she thought she was better than anyone. She had never seen herself that way. But to them, her very presence seemed like a threat. They didn't like the way she carried herself, the way she walked through the halls with her head held high, despite their best efforts to break her down. They didn't like how she seemed to be okay with being herself, even though they had tried every trick to make her feel out of place. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," Jasmine said, her voice quiet but steady. She had always tried to avoid conflict, but there was something about the way these girls were ganging up on her that made her feel like she couldn't back down. "I just want to be left alone." The girl who had been speaking to her laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Left alone? You've been acting all high and mighty around here like you're above us. Well, guess what? We're not going to let you get away with it anymore." Another girl joined in, taking a step forward. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Always at the top of the class, always acting like you've got it all figured out. Well, not anymore." Jasmine clenched her fists at her sides, the tension building inside her. She was trying to keep her cool, but the words were cutting through her, making her feel smaller and smaller with each insult. It wasn't just about her being smart or successful. It was about everything they resented in her. They resented that she was different, that she didn't play by their rules, that she didn't crave the same validation they did. She had always tried to focus on the things that mattered, her education, her future, her dreams. But in their eyes, that was her crime, and it wasn't something they were willing to let go. For a moment, Jasmine felt the urge to leave, to run away from it all. But she quickly realized that running wouldn't fix anything. It would only give them the power they craved. She couldn't let them have that. One of the girls, the one with the sharp features and cold eyes, stepped closer to Jasmine. She looked at her with a mixture of disdain and something darker, something more dangerous. "You think you're just going to get away with all this, huh? Acting like we don't matter?" she spat. "Well, you're not as perfect as you think you are." Jasmine didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. They had made up their minds about her long before this moment. She could see it in their eyes. This wasn't about her actions anymore. This was about their need to bring her down, to make her feel as small as they had convinced themselves she was. But even though fear was creeping in, Jasmine refused to show them how much their words were affecting her. Instead, she stood tall, keeping her shoulders squared, refusing to shrink in front of them. She had never been one to back down in the face of a challenge, and she wasn't about to start now. Then, something unexpected happened. The girl who had been the loudest, the one who seemed to enjoy tormenting her the most, suddenly hesitated. Jasmine noticed it right away. The girl had stopped smirking, her eyes flicking to the other girls as if looking for approval. The rest of the group seemed to sense it too, their collective energy shifting in the room. Jasmine didn't know what was happening, but she could feel the change in the air. They had come in with the intent to break her, but now they seemed uncertain. The girl with the sharp features spoke again, but this time, her voice was softer, almost as if she were unsure of herself. "What? Are you just going to stand there acting like you don't care? Don't you want to say something back? Are you just going to let us say whatever we want?" Jasmine was quiet for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing in on her. She had spent so much time trying to avoid confrontation, trying to stay out of the drama, but now she realized that it wasn't about them or their words. It was about how she chose to respond. She had let them make her feel powerless for too long, but she wasn't going to let it happen anymore. "I don't need to say anything to you," Jasmine said finally, her voice calm and steady. "Your words don't define me." The girls exchanged glances, unsure how to respond. Jasmine had taken them by surprise. They were used to people cowering, begging for mercy, but she wasn't like that. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. For a few seconds, there was silence in the bathroom. The tension was still there, but it wasn't as suffocating as it had been before. Jasmine wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had faced worse things in her life, and somehow she had come out the other side stronger. This was no different. Just as the silence began to feel uncomfortable, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. It was the teacher, Mrs. Harris, who had been walking past when she heard the noise. She had always kept an eye on Jasmine, noticing the way the other students treated her. Mrs. Harris wasn't blind to the bullying that went on in her school, and she had heard the whispers about Jasmine. Without hesitation, Mrs. Harris opened the bathroom door, her eyes immediately searching for the source of the commotion. When she saw the girl standing in front of Jasmine, her face hardened. She had seen enough. "What's going on here?" Mrs. Harris asked, her voice firm but calm. The girls froze, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of an adult. They had been so wrapped up in their cruelty that they hadn't even noticed her approaching. They looked at each other, trying to come up with an excuse, but none came. They were trapped, and they knew it. Jasmine stood still, her body trembling slightly, but her resolve unwavering. Mrs. Harris turned to her first, her eyes softening when she saw how shaken Jasmine looked. "Are you okay?" she asked, her tone gentle. Jasmine nodded, though she wasn't sure if she was okay. She was still processing everything that had just happened, but there was a part of her that felt relief. She wasn't alone anymore. Someone had seen, someone had stepped in. The teacher's gaze shifted back to the girls, who were now visibly uncomfortable. "You girls need to leave," Mrs. Harris said sharply, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Now." For a moment, the girls hesitated, but seeing the look on Mrs. Harris's face, they quickly scurried out of the bathroom, muttering under their breath as they went. Jasmine watched them leave, the weight of the situation beginning to lift. "Are you sure you're okay?" Mrs. Harris asked once the girls were gone. She stepped closer to Jasmine, her concern evident. Jasmine took a deep breath. She wasn't sure how she felt, but she was glad the teacher had shown up when she did. "I'm fine," she said quietly. Mrs. Harris nodded. "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. Don't hesitate to come to me if this ever happens again." Jasmine managed a small smile, feeling a little better knowing that someone cared. For the first time that day, she felt like she might be able to breathe again. After the confrontation in the bathroom, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. As she left the school that day, she walked through the hallways with a sense of disbelief. The whole incident felt surreal, like it was happening to someone else. She had never imagined that a day like this would come, but somehow it had. And even though it had been difficult, even though her heart was still pounding, Jasmine realized something important. She hadn't backed down. She hadn't let them win. The next few days at school were different. For one thing, she started noticing people looking at her differently. It wasn't just the girls who had bullied her. It was everyone. Jasmine had always been aware of how people treated her, how some of the students acted like they didn't even see her. But now it seemed like more people were starting to notice her, in a way that was both comforting and unsettling. At first, it was just subtle things, a glance in the hallway, a polite nod when she passed someone in the classroom. It wasn't much, but it was something. People were starting to look at her not as the girl who was different, the girl who didn't belong, but as someone who could stand up for herself. It wasn't long before the whispers started. The rumors began to spread quickly through the school, and Jasmine heard bits and pieces of the story every time she walked down the hall. The way she had stood her ground in the bathroom, how she didn't let the girls push her around. The more she heard about what happened, the more she realized that she had done something most people wouldn't have had the courage to do. She had never intended for any of it to be about her. She wasn't looking for attention or validation. All she had wanted was to be left alone, to get through her day without feeling like she had to constantly fight for her place. But now she couldn't escape the fact that she had become a symbol of something bigger, of standing up against cruelty, of not letting others define who you were. Jasmine's friends, the few she had, started to reach out to her more. They would sit with her at lunch or chat with her after class. They wanted to know how she was doing, and for the first time in a long while, Jasmine felt like she wasn't alone. She had people who cared, who saw her not just as the girl who was picked on, but as someone worthy of respect. But it wasn't just her friends who started paying attention. Jasmine couldn't help but notice the change in how the bullies acted around her. The girls who had tormented her for so long seemed to be avoiding her now. They would walk past her in the hallway without a word, their eyes downcast like they didn't want to make eye contact. It was almost as if they were ashamed of what had happened, of how they had treated her. For once, Jasmine didn't feel like she was the one who had to be careful. One afternoon, after a particularly long day of classes, Jasmine was walking out of the school when she noticed something strange. A few of the students who had once ignored her, or joined in with the teasing, were now looking at her with something different in their eyes. There was respect there and understanding that hadn't been there before. It wasn't like they were suddenly best friends, but there was a shift, a quiet recognition of her strength. But despite the change in how people treated her, Jasmine still felt a little uneasy. The bullies may have stopped bothering her directly, but that didn't mean they had forgotten. She had no illusions about the kind of people they were. She knew they were capable of turning things around, of finding new ways to make her feel small, and yet she couldn't deny that things had been different in the days since that afternoon. There was a new kind of peace she hadn't felt before, and it was all because of what she had done. One day, as she was walking to her next class, she was surprised when one of the girls who had been part of the bullying group approached her. This was the same girl who had been the loudest, the one who had taunted her the most. Jasmine braced herself, not knowing what to expect. "Hey," the girl said quietly, her voice almost timid. Jasmine raised an eyebrow, unsure of what was going on. She had never expected an apology, but the girl's demeanor seemed different than before. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," she said, her words hesitating as though they were hard to get out, "for everything that happened. I know we were really mean, and I don't know why we did it." "I'm sorry." Jasmine blinked, surprised by the apology. She had never expected this, and for a moment she didn't know how to respond. The words she had always wanted to hear were now being spoken, but part of her was still unsure if they were genuine. "Thanks," Jasmine said after a pause, her voice steady but cautious. "But I don't need your apology. What happened in the bathroom, that's not something I'll forget, but I'm not going to hold it against you." The girl nodded, looking down for a moment as though trying to process what Jasmine had said. "I get it," she murmured. "I just wanted you to know that I was wrong. I'm sorry." Without another word, the girl walked away, leaving Jasmine standing there in a mixture of surprise and confusion. It was a lot to process, but there was something oddly freeing about the moment. For once, Jasmine wasn't the one who had to make the first move. The apology had come from the other side, and it had come without expectation, without any strings attached. As the days passed, Jasmine couldn't stop thinking about the apology. It wasn't like everything was magically fixed. It wasn't like she and the girl were going to become best friends overnight. But it was a step. It was an acknowledgement that the bullying hadn't been okay, that the way Jasmine had been treated was wrong. And that was enough. For the first time, Jasmine felt like the power was in her hands, not theirs. But as much as Jasmine tried to focus on the positive changes in her life, she couldn't ignore the reality of the situation. Things might have been quieter, but there was still the feeling that the story wasn't over. The bullies hadn't been completely eradicated, And Jasmine knew there were still people out there who looked at her with judgment in their eyes. One afternoon, as she was walking out of class, she ran into Mrs. Harris, the teacher who had stepped in during the bathroom incident. Mrs. Harris had been keeping an eye on her, and today she had something important to say. "Jasmine," she said, her voice soft but serious, "I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I know that things have been difficult, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you for how you handled everything. It's not easy to stand up for yourself like that." Jasmine smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It's been tough, but I'm doing okay." Mrs. Harris nodded. "If you ever need to talk or if anything happens, don't hesitate to reach out. You're not alone in this." As Jasmine walked away, she felt a sense of relief that had been building in her for days. She wasn't alone anymore. She had people who cared, who saw her for who she really was. And maybe, just maybe, the things that had once made her feel small were now the very things that made her stronger. As the weeks went by, Jasmine started to adjust to the new normal at school. The bullies had mostly stopped their direct attacks, but she couldn't shake the feeling that things weren't entirely resolved. It wasn't like they had apologized or admitted they were wrong. No, it was more like they had backed off because they realized they couldn't break her. They had underestimated her strength, and now they were figuring out that she wasn't going to be their easy target anymore. But the change wasn't just in how others treated her. Jasmine felt it in herself. She was different now. The girl who had once been quiet and unsure, who had walked the hallways with her head down, was now holding her head up high. She was walking with a confidence she hadn't known she had before. Even on the days when the weight of everything threatened to pull her down, there was a small part of her that knew she could handle it. One day, as she was walking through the school, she noticed a small group of students gathered around the courtyard, talking and laughing. Normally, Jasmine would have just walked past, not wanting to draw attention to herself. But today she felt a little different. She walked toward the group, not sure what she was doing, but feeling a strange pull to be around people. When she got closer, one of the students looked up and smiled at her, a friendly smile that seemed to reach their eyes. Jasmine was taken aback. It wasn't that she wasn't used to smiles. It was just that this one felt genuine. It felt like the kind of smile you give to a friend, not to someone you barely know. "Hey, Jasmine," the student called out. "You doing okay?" Jasmine was surprised. She wasn't used to being greeted like that by someone who wasn't a close friend. "Yeah, I'm good," she said, smiling back, a little unsure of how to respond. The student nodded and motioned to the rest of the group. "We were talking about the incident in the bathroom the other day. You really stood up for yourself." That was brave. The mention of the bathroom incident made Jasmine's chest tighten. It had been such an intense moment, one that had changed everything for her, but hearing it brought back some of the nerves. But there was something about the way this student spoke, with respect and understanding, that made Jasmine feel like maybe, just maybe, things were starting to shift for the better. "I didn't really think about it at the time," Jasmine said, shrugging a little. "I was just trying to get through it." "You handled it better than most would," the student said, a slight smile on their face. "I just wanted you to know that a lot of people saw that and they respect you for it." The words hit Jasmine harder than she expected. She hadn't been looking for respect, but it felt good to know that there were people who saw her strength. It was like a weight lifted off her shoulders, knowing that her actions had made a difference. Not just for her, but for others too. The thought that she had inspired someone, that she had changed something in the school just by being herself, made her feel proud. For the rest of the day, Jasmine felt a little lighter. She had been carrying so much on her shoulders for so long, but now it felt like the burden was easing. Maybe this wasn't just about the bullies anymore. Maybe this was about something bigger. A chance to change how people treated each other. A chance to show that standing up for yourself didn't make you weak. It made you stronger. The next few days were filled with more moments like that. Small interactions, casual conversations that made Jasmine feel like she was part of something bigger. People who hadn't paid much attention to her before started to acknowledge her. It was the kind of thing she never expected to happen. After all, she had spent so many years trying to blend in, trying not to be noticed. But now it seemed like people were seeing her for who she was, not just as the girl who had been bullied, but as someone who could stand on her own. However, things weren't perfect. As much as she wanted to believe that everything had changed, Jasmine couldn't forget what had happened. She couldn't ignore the fact that there were still people who looked at her with judgment, who whispered when she walked by. The girl who had apologized was an outlier. Most of the other students hadn't taken any responsibility for their actions. The bullies may have backed off, but there were still whispers. Still moments when she felt the weight of their stares. And then there were the days when she felt tired. Tired of the constant battle to prove herself. Tired of wondering if the next person who smiled at her was just pretending. There were days when she questioned whether this new version of herself was just a mask, something she had put on to protect herself. Was she really stronger? Or had she just learned how to hide her vulnerability? One afternoon, as she sat in the library reading a book lost in the quiet of the room, a familiar face appeared in front of her. It was Mrs. Harris, the teacher who had stepped in during the bathroom incident. "Mind if I sit?" Mrs. Harris asked with a gentle smile. Jasmine looked up, surprised by the teacher's presence but glad for the company. "Of course." Mrs. Harris sat down across from her, folding her hands in front of her. "I just wanted to check in with you. I've noticed some changes in you, and I wanted to make sure you're doing okay." Jasmine smiled faintly. "Yeah, I'm doing better. It's been a lot, but I'm managing." "I can imagine," Mrs. Harris said, nodding. "It's not easy to go through something like that, but I have to say I'm really proud of how you've handled it. You've shown a lot of strength." Jasmine's chest tightened a little. She wasn't used to hearing that kind of praise. She had never considered herself strong, just someone trying to survive. But hearing it from Mrs. Harris made her feel like maybe she wasn't just getting by. Maybe she was becoming something more. "I didn't really think I had a choice," Jasmine said softly. "It was just one of those moments where I had to decide whether I was going to let them win or stand up for myself." "You made the right choice," Mrs. Harris said with a reassuring smile. "Sometimes, standing up for yourself isn't about what others think of you. It's about showing yourself that you can handle whatever life throws at you." Jasmine looked down at her hands, turning the pages of the book in front of her without really reading it. "I still have days where I wonder if it was enough. If I'm really changing or if I'm just pretending to be stronger than I am." Mrs. Harris studied her for a moment, then leaned forward slightly. "It's okay to have those moments. Strength doesn't mean you never feel weak. It means that when you do feel weak, you don't give up. You keep going." Jasmine nodded slowly, taking in Mrs. Harris's words. It felt comforting to know that she wasn't expected to be perfect, that she didn't have to have everything figured out right away. Strength, she realized, wasn't about having all the answers. It was about learning to face the uncertainty, to keep moving forward even when you didn't feel like you could. As the weeks passed, Jasmine continued to find her footing. The school wasn't perfect and things still weren't always easy, but she had learned something important along the way. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She had already proved it to herself. The bullies may have tried to break her, but they had failed. Jasmine had discovered that her true strength wasn't in avoiding pain or hiding from the world. It was in standing up for herself, even when it was hard. And no matter what happened from here on out, she knew that she would never let anyone take that from her again. Weeks had passed since the incident in the bathroom, and while things had quieted down, Jasmine still found herself thinking about the journey she had been on. She had come so far since that day, but it hadn't been easy. There were days when the memories of the bullying crept up on her, when the doubt and the fear from before returned, but each time, she fought back. She had learned to be strong, not just for herself, but for others too. It was one of those quieter days when Jasmine found herself in the library again. It had become her refuge, the one place she could lose herself in a book and forget about the world for a while. But that day was different. She wasn't lost in a novel. Instead, she found herself reflecting on how much had changed. The bullies, though they no longer targeted her, still lingered in the back of her mind. They didn't come around anymore, but Jasmine couldn't quite shake the feeling that the damage they had done wasn't just going to disappear. She didn't know what was going to happen in the future, whether they would leave her alone for good or if they would find a new way to make her feel small. But what she had realized in all the time since the confrontation was that she couldn't let fear control her anymore. No one had the power to define who she was, not even them. As Jasmine sat in the library, lost in thought, she noticed someone walking toward her. It was a familiar face, one she had seen in the hallways many times before. It was one of the girls who had been part of the group that had tormented her. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. Her first instinct was to brace herself, to prepare for another confrontation, but the girl didn't seem like she was there to cause trouble. "Hey, do you mind if I sit?" the girl asked, her voice softer than Jasmine remembered. She was holding a book, just like Jasmine was. Jasmine hesitated for a moment, unsure of what this interaction might lead to, but something in the girl's eyes told her that this wasn't going to be like the past. "Sure," Jasmine said, motioning to the seat across from her. The girl sat down, glancing around the library as if unsure of what to say next. She seemed nervous, almost out of place in the quiet, peaceful setting. Jasmine had never really spoken to her outside of the bullying, and she wasn't sure what to expect. I wanted to talk to you," the girl said, breaking the silence. "I know this probably isn't the easiest thing for you, but I just want to say that I'm really sorry." Jasmine's heart raced. This was the last thing she had expected. The girl who had once laughed at her, made her feel so small, was now apologizing. It didn't make sense, and Jasmine wasn't sure what to say. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," the girl continued, her voice shaky. "But I need you to know that I realize now how wrong I was. How wrong all of us were. The way we treated you, it wasn't right, and I'm sorry for being part of it." Jasmine stared at her, unsure of how to respond. She had never expected an apology, let alone one that felt so sincere. The words felt strange in her ears, but at the same time they made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. "I don't know what to say," Jasmine said, finally breaking the silence. "I never thought I'd hear an apology from you." The girl looked down, her fingers nervously twisting the corner of her book. "I know, I didn't expect it either. But after everything that happened, after seeing how strong you were, I realized I had to do something. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I just wanted to say that I was wrong. I'm sorry for everything." Jasmine didn't know how to react. Part of her wanted to say that it was okay, that she had forgiven her, but part of her was still hesitant. It wasn't easy to forget the pain the girl had caused. But as she looked at the girl sitting across from her, she saw the genuine remorse in her eyes. "I appreciate you saying that," Jasmine said quietly. "I don't know if I can just forget what happened, but I'm glad you're owning up to it." "That means something." The girl nodded, a small but relieved smile crossing her face. "Thank you for saying that. I don't expect everything to be fixed overnight, but I want to make it right." Jasmine nodded, unsure of where to go from here. They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the conversation settling in between them. It wasn't the conversation Jasmine had ever imagined having, but in a strange way, it felt like a step forward, a chance for both of them to heal from the past, even if that healing would take time. After a while, the girl stood up, gathering her things. "I'll leave you to your book," she said with a shy smile. "But I just wanted to say thank you for listening, and I hope we can both move forward from this." Jasmine watched as she walked away, feeling a strange sense of closure. She wasn't sure what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could let go of some of the anger and hurt she had been carrying. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was a new chapter. And for the first time, Jasmine felt like she had control of her own narrative. She wasn't going to let anyone tell her who she was anymore, and she wasn't going to let the past hold her back. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Jasmine went through her classes, her mind still spinning from the conversation in the library. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. She had changed. The girl who had once felt powerless, who had been afraid of standing up for herself, was gone. In her place was someone who knew her worth, someone who had faced the worst and come out the other side stronger, someone who knew that her strength wasn't just in her ability to stand up to bullies, but in her ability to forgive, to move forward, and to let go of the things that no longer served her. As she walked home that day, the sun setting behind her, Jasmine realized that the journey wasn't over. It wasn't just about what had happened in the past. It was about how she was going to carry herself moving forward. She was no longer defined by the bullying, no longer held captive by the opinions of others. She was free, and for the first time in a long time, Jasmine felt truly at peace.